Hey, what's happening, everybody? It is Robert Phoenix, and I'm live here on YouTube tonight, 7:30. I know. I thought I was going to be broadcasting at 6, but I got sucked into some football. That's what's happening. I got sucked into a little football. Let me just go over to Facebook and let people know what's happening. Go into house. That's me. Just throw this up there. One sec. It was interesting, so kind of a picture YouTube gives me. Pretty grim. It's okay, I'll live with grim. Grim is better than the other alternatives. And the other alternatives are none. That's the other alternative. So, hey, what's happening out there? It's Robert Phoenix, broadcasting live from Fredericksburg, Texas. You're a blue-collar astrologer. That's me. And let me make sure I've got the right stuff here. I'm gonna go direct into the hard wire. Just do this experience, and we are now hopefully just jacked right in. Just jacked right into the matrix. Okay, let's see who's here. We got Justice. We got Liz Licious. Here we go, trying to get, yes, I am. It was on the wrong channel. It was on the wrong channel. It's got to be on the right channel. Let's see. What do I say? There's Judy. Hi, Judy. Luann. Here we go. And Isla. There's Joan. And Turkey Listener. What's going on? Gobble, gobble, gobble. Darcy. Hi, Darcy. Lynette. Bonnie. And let's see. There's Don Hart. The gathering. The gathering is upon us. It is upon us. Almost just a little less than 2 weeks to go. Hey, Janelle. Hi, Jan. There's Anna. So, Anna, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be having Derrick Rose on my show on Friday. Thanks to you. If you guys don't know who Derrick Rose is, I think there's like 2 Derrick Roses. There's a Derrick Rose that I was friends with on Facebook that I think is connected to the Emily Randy world. And then there's another Derrick Rose who's running for the mayor position in Houston. And he seems like a very cool guy. Speaking of cool guys, look who's here. All right. Of course. Of course, it would not be a broadcast without the beast from the streets of San Francisco, Jasper, the Astro Cat. Jasper, you got anything to say? Anything you want to say to people tonight? 30 words of cat wisdom. So I'm going to have Derrick Rose on my show on Friday. Derrick seems like a very interesting guy, and he is kind of right up the alley of where I think we need to be. And where that needs to be is our boots on the ground in local government and doing our best to be able to make a change, and changes in ways that we all, I think, more or less agree upon, at least the people that watch this channel and hang out in the chat room. And Derrick's platform is very similar to a lot of the things that I'm very interested in. And there are some things that are very Houstonian specific. So he's going to be on my show on Friday, and I'm going to talk to him. Again, seems like a really great guy. And I just want to lend my support to somebody who's going out there. And I don't know if he will win. It would be great if he did. At the very least, his platform will get out there. And that's a lot. It's one of the reasons why people get into the political arena. Sometimes they know that they're not going to win, but they want the ideas to get out there, and they become kind of a signpost for the ideas, a signator for the ideas. So he's going to be on, and apparently he's again, anti-5G, anti-fluoride, which are kind of the staples of my world and a lot of the worlds of the people that touch in here. So there's not just that, but apparently also apparently it's like illegal to feed people in Houston, which I'm not sure what that's all about, but I saw that as part of his platform. And they have some really heavy duty, like no search warrant raid policies. And there's been some heavy stuff that's gone down in Houston with the cops. So we're going to find out more about all that and more about Derrick on Friday. So thank you, Anna, for making that connection. And that's what, hey, this is what this media is about. This is why we have the tools. Theoretically, this is our time. Use them before we lose them. All right. Let's see, who else do we have in the chat room as we gather forces? Yes, he's part of the conscious resistance. That's what Anna says. There's Ian. Hey, Ian. The guy who did the Finders videos. It's a different Derrick. That's a different Derrick. That's why I got confused. So the Finders videos is a Derrick Rose that's connected to the Randy and Emily circle. So this is a different Derrick, because I'm friends with that Derrick on Facebook, and I sent him an email and I said, hey man, I hear you're running for the mayor of Houston. Anna says same guy. I don't know if it's the same guy or not, because I have a Derrick Rose friend on. Is it the same guy? Okay, I'm confused now. I'm in Gemini land, because maybe the other guy that's Derrick Rose is a different Derrick Rose. Wow. Okay, I heard my son telling his friend he was a Gemini like his dad. I had to break it to him. He's really a Cancer. Y'all should see the look on his face. I'm not sure what that's about, but hi, your catness. Okay, hey, there's Marcos. What's going on, Marcos? Good to see you. Marcos, a neighbor just to the south of me in San Antonio. San Antonio. Okay, wow, there's a lot to cover. A lot to get into tonight. We're going to, of course, get into the chart of the moment and look at where the planets are. And we're going to look at what happened during the UN speech that Greta Garble, that's my new nickname for her, it's Greta Garble. No, that's actually kind of cruel. That is actually, I'm surprised nobody's come up with that. But that would be cruel. I'm going to look at the speech, and I'm going to look at the time of the speech roughly, and I'm going to look at the Greta chart in relationship with that speech. So we're gonna get into that tonight and try to make heads and tails of what those two charts look like. We got the chart of the moment, and then it seems like there's a lot going on in Washington D.C. right now, with Trump always at the center of the storm. So I think we'll take another look at Trump's chart tonight. Maybe we'll pop into his progress chart tonight and see what's happening with some of the transits, because it's starting to get a little hot and heavy. There are a lot of people that think that this is, again, yet just another I mean, there's so many ways that we can kind of break this down and look at the latest crisis, the latest conspiracy that is coming out of the left, coming out of left field. There's so many ways we can kind of just kind of look at it on the surface, because it is, in a lot of ways, a pretty significant distraction. It's another distraction that we have to deal with, as there are a lot of other aspects to life that are taking place at the same time, especially when it comes to things like the financial sector and what's going on also in the Middle East and to some extent North Africa, but most of the Middle East. There's a hell of a lot going on in Saudi Arabia, well, with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Apparently the Houthis captured a large contingency of Saudi soldiers, commanders, and weapons. So the Houthis have made a significant stash. They've got a significant stash of assets that they may actually be able to use in some ways to tell the Saudis to back the you-know-what up and off. So anyway, we're gonna look at some of that. And I'm also gonna look at the chart and the mysterious death of Marc Bolan. And some of you may know who Marc Bolan is. Some of you might be old enough to remember Marc Bolan. Those of you who aren't, you'll get kind of an introduction into somebody who had kind of a major run back in, I'd say roughly about from around 1972, 71, 72 to about 1974, 75. And we'll look at some of the reasons why Marc Bolan became so incredibly famous for a brief period of time. In England, he was the equivalent of a rock god, but he was a very different kind of rock god. He was not like his heavy metal brethren, although there was at that time in the 70s, in the early 70s, and again, I've talked about this before with Neptune and Sagittarius, that there was a very mystical theme that was unfolding during that period of time. And again, if you go back and look at late 1969, 70, 71, 70, you know, right around from 70 to about 76, 77, that 7-year period is a pretty significant period. You can almost run that all the way up to 78, 79. So almost the decade of the 70s, which were much, you know, people think about the 70s, they think the 70s were this kind of sleepy throwback era where America was getting demoralized. And well, a lot of that is true. But it was also an incredibly mystical time, and that mysticism sort of bled into a lot of different aspects of media and music and art. And I've covered some of that. A couple of weeks ago, we actually looked at Neptune and Sagittarius. We looked at some of the characters that were happening during that period of time. You had Brother Yod, also known as Jim Baker, not the Jim Baker who wound up, I think, is that Jim Baker dead now? I think Tammy Faye is gone, right? Jim Baker's still alive. I think he's still alive, but it's not that Jim Baker. This is a Jim Baker who was voted America's strongest boy. Isn't that funny? He was voted America's strongest boy. And his, I think he didn't have any real parents, or something happened to his parents. And he was raised pretty much by the guy who started the Bragg's Aminos company. You know, the Bragg's Aminos, all that Bragg stuff. That guy raised Jim Baker, also known as Father Yod, and he went on to start a group called the Source Family. And all that happens right around 1970, 71, 72, Los Angeles, where it's just this kind of mystical haven, right? And then, of course, you had people like Charlie Manson in the background, which was a kind of a much darker version of Source Family. Now, some people say, well, Source Family is pretty dark, but not in the same way that the Manson family was. But it was, again, it was kind of this, you know, when you get into Neptune, you get into Pisces, you do get into some of the narrative of polarity. And the Source Family might have been sort of the lighter polarity of the Manson family. There were two families that were living in California, Southern California, Los Angeles, and Source Family became very, very prominent. Lots of money, and they had some restaurants that they were getting a lot of the money from. And of course, everybody worked for free, because that's the beauty of living in a commune, or the beauty of running a commune and having people living in your commune. They all work for free. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, that was happening. And there was also a lot of other mysticism taking place. Alan Watts, the great drunken philosopher, the former Anglican priest, who I think got kicked out of the Anglican Church and came to the United States and landed in San Francisco and Marin County during the Summer of Love. And then beyond that, he was very prominent and another one of these mystical voices that sort of emerged from the American landscape. He was obviously an expat or from England, and he was again kind of a willing participant during that time, and fit into the Neptune in Sagittarius Kodak, and especially since he was from another country. So it was really rich during that time, and there was an interesting kind of movement with kind of a born again Christianity. You know, that was sort of happening. You know, you had, again, I mentioned this before, but I'll just go through because it's such a fascinating time. And Marc Bolan is a character that emerges during that time. And you'll see why he emerges when I get into his chart. But it was a very fascinating time. You had Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar and Brother Sun and Sister Moon. And there was this, the Doobie Brothers were saying, Jesus is just all right with me. This is kind of a big deal. It's also the time when Osho begins to kind of pop up in Pune. in India. And it's the rise of the Indian guru in a very, very big way. Maraji comes to America. And then you have the human potential movement with Werner Erhard and his thing with Est. And of course, there was also in the 70s, people like Oscar Ichazo and that whole scene in Esalen, which ultimately that Esalen scene goes on to influence the Bay Area because it's right there in the neck of the Bay Area, at the nape of the Bay Area, and it influences Stanford Research Institute. And it influences people like Russell Targ, who ultimately starts up the Psychic Warrior program, Project Grill Flame. It's all happening. It's all happening right at that time. So rock and roll was not immune to the mystical musings of that period. I mean, let's look at Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin is this sort of mystical folk American blues heavy metal rock band that rips songs off, which is kind of what they did, right? Let's see. Okay. So rock and roll definitely had a feel. There was I mean, it was psychedelic, it was mystical, you had Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd, you had Led Zeppelin, and then Marc Bolan plays a pretty significant role during that period. He has an amazing run from about 1971 to about 1975, 76. So we'll look at that. We'll look at his very strange death as well. But right now, what we're going to do is we're going to drop into the chart of the moment, because that is sort of what we're on schedule for. Let's see what we got here. I think this might be it. Let's see what we got. Yep. All right. Here we go. It was the chart of the moment. Yes, the band Yes comes out of that period. They were totally mystical. You know what I used to do when I was a kid? I used to listen to Yes, and I used to burn incense and listen to them. Especially, that's not what we want. Stop the shirt. Especially the album Close to the Edge. The magnum opus, Close to the Edge. There we go. All right, that's the chart of the moment. Take a look at that. And that was at 6:45 Central Standard Time. So I guess I grabbed this about an hour ago. Maybe I need to let me do a new one. That's old news, man. That is old news. We've moved. There's some interesting stuff happening with the Galactic Center. There's some action going on in the Galactic Center. It is pulsing like a mofo. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to that, but there's some serious action going on with the Galactic Center. And it's interesting because Jupiter is moving into tropical conjunction, Placidus conjunction with the Galactic Center. Okay, let me do this chart of the moment again. Here we go. Fresher version, straight out of the oven, straight out of the Astro oven. I like this one better anyway. Let's get into it. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Now, Jasper, you were just having such a really relaxing time over there. Don't you want to stay over there a bit longer? Guess not. Oh, okay. So what do you have to say to everybody tonight? You have a lot in your mind, don't you? Okay, here we go. All right, that's more like it. Okay, so just to, it was really interesting. I did an interview on Friday afternoon with James Barkley. Very nice guy. Very nice guy. You guys should check out his YouTube channel and shows. Very informed, very nice guy. He's kind of in the Randy, Emily, Masaki Miyagawa world. Super cool guy. Lives down in Australia. Did a 55-minute show with him. And one of the things he asked me at the beginning of the show is, can you go over some of the terminology around astrology so people know what you're talking about? And, it was a really good question. Sometimes I take it for granted that people know kind of what I'm talking about. And a lot of you have been here and have been watching the show and sort of participating. Some of you have actually, downloaded the course and stuff like that. So sometimes I take it for granted. Everybody's just kind of on the same page with the vocabulary and the vernacular. So just because maybe there's somebody listening tonight or watching tonight that is not up to speed, I'm just going to go through a few things so that we all have a better handle about what I'm going to talk about, or at least try to break down. So when we look at a chart, right, the chart is broken down into angles and geometry. It's really, really funny. I just as a side, here we go. Here's the story. Just as a side, we went to the local football game on Friday night here, the Fredericksburg Billies, the Battling Billies, and it was my second football game of the season. Actually, it's the first time I've seen a local high school team play. I don't know anybody there, but it's Texas. It's a Friday night, and if you're not watching high school football on Friday night in Texas, I guess you're just not living. Well, that's not really the case, but it's a big deal. And so I decided to go a couple of weeks ago. Boy, was it really exciting. It was a very, very exciting, very local experience. And they were playing one of their rivals, which is the Kerrville School, Tivy. And this last Friday night, we were playing Bernie. And Bernie is towards San Antonio. Anyway, myself and Patrick from Clean Water Fred, we got to the game ahead of time before it started, and we passed out water. So, we got a big election coming up, and we're just giving people cold water. And that was cool. And then Patrick and I had a bit of an interesting exchange around astrology. And so I asked him, I said, so when's your birthday? He was very hesitant to give it up to me. And I know why, because Patrick is a very religious person. He's a very devout Catholic, which I have no problem with. It's like, okay. He says, January. And I knew that he didn't want to give it up. I said, January what? He said, January 3rd. And I said, oh, well, that makes you a Capricorn. And he says, theoretically. So we had a bit of a philosophical conversation about astrology and the church and religion and God, and how God is very clear about, or the Bible is very clear about instances where prophecy and wizardry is verboten. In fact, you burn in a fire like in hell if you do it. So I said to him, I said, well, I guess my fate is sealed. And he says, our God is a very loving and forgiving God. It was a funny conversation. And I basically said, theoretically, based on astrology, you should be running your own business. And we had a few chuckles, and it wasn't like I was trying to convert him to astrology or anything. But I'll give you an example. Like he's very involved in city government. Well, he's trying to get involved in city government. He's seeing where the discrepancies are between the actual application of clear thought, rationality, and what the people of the city council actually do. So he's been moved to get involved, and he's been involved with the anti-fluoride campaign, which has been great. So apparently there's an issue here in town with the recycling center, and they've been sending the recycling to this recycling place that is just dumping it, and it's a landfill. This has been going on for a while now. This is not just here in Fredericksburg, but they were finding in Philadelphia that they were taking a lot of the recycling, and they weren't even recycling, they were just turning it into landfill. And that's what was happening here. So now it's a big deal. And he told me, well, a friend of mine and I have looked into starting our own recycling business, curbside recycling. We're looking for partners, et cetera, people who can actually recycle the product. And I'm like, if that's not being a Capricorn, I don't know what is, right? Because that's that interface between the government and business, which is kind of where we are, obviously, with Pluto and Saturn, the South Node. So even though he may not believe in astrology, he's kind of moving along the Capricornian path in a lot of ways. Now, I would never force him to admit that, because that's just not how I operate. You know, when it comes to astrology, I don't have to prove. And there are a few areas sometimes where I have to prove that I'm right. We all have those moments. And whether it's just out of the principle or out of pride, it does happen every now and then. I will admit that. But I certainly was not going to try to convince him of how Capricornian he was. That was not happening. It was a great game, and Fredericksburg actually won. Very exciting game. Super exciting. Anyway, so I'm going to just get into some of the aspects here, so people understand what we're talking about. So astrology is based on angularity, angles, degrees, and it is based on the planetary relationship, theoretically, again, because we're dealing with the tropical zodiac, the Placidus tropical zodiac versus the sidereal zodiacs. That's a whole nother kind of wrinkle in the scheme of things. But nonetheless, based on what we have here, it is a science or an art, let's call it an art that is based on angularity and interpretation. And what we have here, these red lines, are generally considered to be challenging. In this instance, we are looking at 90-degree angles, and these are called squares. And I know a lot of you in the chat room are like, come on, Robert, get on with it. But there are some people that don't know this, okay? So these are squares, and they're considered to be challenging. A lot of people get freaked out by squares. I have found that squares can be your friend and your ally if you can live with the intensity and plan like your life is in a vice grip at times. Then we have the smaller blue lines here. These are 60-degree angles. I guess let's just kind of break down. 60-degree angles. These are the sextiles. This is a sextile. It's generally considered to be easy, flowing, beneficent. My interpretation of sextiles is that the energy needs to be activated. Like if you're having a sextile transit in your life, you need to approach that transit as if you will put your hands in that transit and turn the ignition on and move into that transit. This is, and if you look at it from the natal chart, the sextile is offering you the opportunity to learn something new. That's how they work, okay? 60-degree angle. Now, we go to the square, that's another 30 degrees, that's a 90-degree angle. Those are about growth, challenge. They're about, to some degree, mastery. There's pressure involved with squares. And ultimately, they can be your ally if you're willing to, like I said, deal with the discomfort at times of the square. Now, the longer blue lines, these are trines, and they are 120-degree angles, and this is where the energy flows quite easily. It's an easy flow, easy go, the trine. So we've got that. We have, and usually with the natal chart, when you have a trine, you have something that is kind of baked into who you are. It's something you can tap into. You're good at it. It's like a skill or a gift that, you know, once you get into it, it's sort of like relearning something. Versus, so the sextile is something you learn more easily. The trine is something that maybe you already kind of know or have an affinity for. And a lot of times people will take their trines for granted, by the way. So again, I'm just sharing some of this because some people may not be aware of these things. And then we have one of my favorite aspects, which is the inconjunct. This is the broken path with a broken line. And we have Venus over here in the sign of Libra. And then we have Neptune over here in the sign of Pisces. And Libra and Pisces do not have a relationship with each other. They do not square against each other. They do not sextile against each other. They do not trine against each other. They don't even oppose each other. The opposition is something that's actually not in this chart tonight. However, when they get within a certain orb, and what I mean by an orb, just to, again, to clarify the definition, the orb is the difference of the degrees between planets. Right, so here we have 19 degrees and 13 minutes with Venus, and then we have 24 degrees, 33 minutes with the moon. That would indicate that there would be a 5-degree orb. That is the nominative definition, right? So when you get into an inconjunct, the orb cannot be no more than 3 degrees, or else it moves out of the angle of the inconjunct. So anything from 0 to 3 represents it as an inconjunct. So now what do we have? Well, we've got a 150-degree angle where these two planets are related in a very unusual way. And it's up to either the astrologer or the individual who's going through the transit or has the aspect natally that that you've got to figure out what that relationship is on some level. It usually is indicative of having to feel versus being rational, deductive, or linear. So in this case, we always have the sort of the greater planet here would be Neptune. So it would be the Venus in conjunct to Neptune, because Neptune pulls rank on Venus. Or we have the Sun in conjunct to Uranus, because you always start with the outer planets. They're the ones that are like the gods of the chart. So in this case, in the chart of the moment, we would be looking at this kind of very interesting, perhaps mystical relationship with the unknown, or maybe the 11th house, which is kind of interesting because I'm going to talk about Marc Bolan's death. There's some very unusual oddities around Marc Bolan's death, very strange stuff. So perhaps this gets into the language of the Venus-Neptune in conjunct with Neptune in the 12th house. But it would also be something along the lines of having, well, let's say you had this in your natal chart. It would be something along the lines of having very unusual and or faded either relationships or feelings for people that you cannot comprehend nor understand. So it would be like, let's say you had a relationship that sort of came into your life out of the blue under very unusual circumstances. And like the tide, Neptune brings it in and then pulls it away. And so you have to try to understand, well, what was that all about? Right? How did this happen? What kind of strange forces brought this relationship into my life? And was it a good thing or was it a bad thing? But that would be Venus in conjunct to Neptune. I don't think it would be a really good time to start a relationship with a Venus in conjunct to Neptune, but you're not going to walk around and say, hey, I'm just really interested in a relationship. But, I think Venus transiting Venus in conjunct Neptune. I mean, maybe you want to be that specific. Then that might work for you. But that's how the in conjunct works. There would also be sort of the greater idea or ideal about relationship in general, not just the specific relationship, but human relationships and human interactivity or bonds might be very unusual or hard to understand with a Venus-Neptune in conjunct. So part of the life would be dedicated in some ways to uncovering that mystery. And because Neptune tends to be very, especially in Pisces, tends to be very creative, and Venus can be creative, there's also creative potential here, like uncovering the creative potential of the self and the creative potential of the individual. So, we tend to be, in a lot of ways, very Mars dominant, although I think that that's changing in some ways, for better or worse. And I think maybe Mars is getting a bad rap. And we got Chiron in Aries, and we can see some of this happening again, just like it happened around 1968, 1969, when Chiron was back in Aries and we had the Paris revolutions. There was a lot going on in 1968 when Chiron went into Aries. The world was going to hell. It was on the road. That was the aspect that was taking us into Kent State. And we had riots in America and riots on the American campuses. And we're starting to see that again. We're starting to see that with, that happened with the yellow vests. The yellow vests were almost synonymous with the riots and the strikes and the radical demonstrations in Paris in 1968. It was very kind of a famous time. There were movies made about that period. And almost right on time, the yellow vests show up. Isn't that interesting? And now we have the children's strikes. the school strikes. And during that time in the 1960s, 1968, it was campuses. Although there were high schools that were doing walkouts during that time for the Vietnam War, they're less known than what was happening on campuses across America, but that was definitely happening. And what do we have now with Chiron and Aries? Well, we've got kids now in high school that want to strike for the climate. And I don't know if you've saw any of the pictures from places all over the world. There are massive numbers of kids that are protesting this climate stuff, right? It's climate change. It's a little it's a little frightening on some level. It's not. Look, I'm not frightened or scared of kids that have power, but I'm not crazy about who is shepherding them. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. That's who's shepherding them. It was interesting. I was talking about this with Marina a couple of weeks ago, and the Pied Piper of Hamelin came up. And what aspect was that under? Oh, man. Let me see if I can figure this out, because this is really pertinent to kind of what we're going through with these kids. Give me a second. Let me just do a quick search so that I can nail this thing down. The Pied Piper of Hamelin's a very weird story, by the way, and very real. It was about child abduction. Okay, so the Pied Piper of Hamelin, also known as the Rat Catcher of Hamelin. And of course, I think he played a flute or a piccolo, isn't that right? So the Pied Piper of Hamelin played a tune that seduced and entranced the children of the village in the town of Hamelin. First, he started with rats, and he played his flute because there was a rat infestation in the town. And he lured the rats into the Weser River, where they all drowned. How about that? And then there were kids. So some of these kids died. Some of these kids, they just disappeared. It's a very strange story. Very strange story. So he starts with rats and he moves on to kids. Okay. So that was in 1284. All right. So let's go back into astro.com and let's get into the year of 1284. So there was an aspect here that Marina and I talked about. Okay, give me 1 second. $12.84. All right, where are we? Let's go here. Let's see what we got. Dropping into 1250. Oh, it's going backwards. Give me a sec. Let me go here. CE 1500. Take it back. Well, this is an unplanned stop on the express. So we just have to make this down. Give me 1 sec. All right, that should do it. Yes, now we're headed in the right direction. All the way back to the golden age of 1284. We're men, women and women, we're women, and rats. Headed towards the river Weser. All right, give me 1 sec. 1284. Almost there. Slowly coming up. I feel like this is H.G. Wells in The Time Machine. I was spinning backwards. I'm at 1282, 1283, 1284, 1284. We've gone all the way back to 1284. All right, so the aspect. Oh, let me show you this. Let me show you this. This is really cool. This is why I love astrology. This is one of the reasons why I love astrology. Okay, so I'm going to get out of the share here. I'm going to get into a new share. I'm in a sharing mood. Okay. All right, so here we go. Here's the old ephemeris. January of 1284. This is when the Pied Piper of Hamelin was blowing his tune. And what do we have here? We got all Pluto in Capricorn, right? What do we have over here? We got old Saturn in Capricorn. Oh, yeah. Even though they didn't have Pluto back then. What do we have here? We have the true node in Capricorn. I think this was the last time that they had the Saturn, Pluto, the true node. Now the south node obviously is in Capricorn now. But this is a very interesting kind of echo in time. And we're looking at, ironically, right here in 1284, we got right here, we're looking at 22. So right around the 9th and the 10th of, I think we're going to go a little bit further out now, don't we? Okay, so it's right here. This is the Julian calendar, though, so this is not necessarily going to be the same. So the timing is going to be off compared to the calendar. So it's going to be retrograde, too. But well, let's go up to the end of the year. There's this Pluto stays in Capricorn. Goes into Aquarius, right, at some point. Yeah, and it will go retrograde, but that's 1287. We want to get to 1284, because that's where it's at. 6, 1285, 1284. There it is. Yeah, right there, October. So we could go back to October because we're almost in October now. And then we go into September because that's where we are. Okay, so the 29th, Saturn was at 20 degrees, Capricorn, and Pluto's at 24, and then we have the true node. So why is this of significance? Because this is where Saturn and Pluto are now. And this is very similar in some ways to this metaphor of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, where there was this individual who entranced the children of the village of Hamelin, and they wound up disappearing. They all sort of fell in line with the Pied Piper. And the rumor is that he wound up selling them to other towns in the area or just outside the area because of children that had died in some of these other towns based on the rat infestation and a version of the plague that they were dealing with in Germany. So he was basically he was a child trafficker. Now I don't know how he did this. You know, I don't know what sort of tune he played, but that's what happened. Now, what's happening to the children of this period in time? They seem to be dancing to the unheard music, and the unheard music of a planetary change or a shift or a paradigm. It's very interesting to see what's going on and how these children are being assembled almost into like a children's crusade. Now, I've talked about Greta as being a version of Joan of Arc, which technically she kind of is, because their birthday is separated by 3 days. Again, different calendars, So the orbs are going to be different. But if you were just looking at it from a kind of a Gregorian standpoint, it would be a 3-degree orb because they're 3 degrees apart. So is Greta the Pied Piper? Is she playing the role of the Pied Piper? Or is Greta just dancing to the tune of a different Pied Piper, or the actual Pied Piper that we cannot see, nor as adults that we may not be able to hear? But this is a very interesting aspect. The whole idea of the Pied Piper of Hamelin and being in the same area with Saturn and Pluto, and then the true node in Pluto. Right now we have the south node. I'm sorry, true node in Capricorn, and then we have the south node in Capricorn. So it's almost like a piece of a puzzle in some ways that comes together. Again, this is why I love astrology, because we're seeing these same aspects that were happening in 1284 with Saturn and Pluto. Neptune is in the opposite sign of where it is now. Back then it was in Virgo, and then now we have it in Pisces. And it seems to me that there is a bit more hysteria with Neptune and Pisces, and particularly with the Jupiter square, which we're still dealing with. So fascinating stuff, really, really fascinating stuff. The Pied Piper Hamelin and the entrainment and the entrancement of children, and children being led off and led astray to either their demise or neighboring villages. The rumor has it that they went into the side of a mountain and were never to be seen again. But rationally, there's the theory, like I said, that the neighboring kingdoms who were low on kids got a refill. That's theoretically what happened. And I think the Pied Piper of Hamelin might have been paid handsomely. I mean, think about it. Think about maybe being in that time, being in 1284. And let's say you're this very colorful character, super colorful character, and you've kind of mastered some interesting scales and are able to actually maybe entrain rats, if that's the case. But let's take the rat thing out of the story. But let's say you walk into town and you've got really colorful clothes and you've got little pointy shoes with balls on them, and you're playing this wonderful instrument. Like if you're a kid in 1284, what are you going to do? You're going to go, ooh, look at that, look at the man. And probably dance around and ooh, right? I mean, come on. It's probably fairly innocent time. And the Pied Piper just walks through town and all the kids just follow him. And then who knows what he does with them after that? I don't know, right? But this is the time that represents that aspect. And what do we see in our kids doing? They are essentially being led away, right? They're being led away from, their town or their province or their high school. And I don't really have a problem with them like getting out of school, because schools, whatever. They could be doing better things. I'm not sure if that's the better thing. Or they could be going to a better school, or they could be hanging out at home and learning, right? So anyway, I don't want to moralize about school too much, but that's what's happening. And I think it would be very difficult to be a parent in that regard, to have those kinds of conversations and sit down with your kid, and your kid is essentially being radicalized in a lot of ways. Now, if you're somebody who is if you're a radical yourself, or you pitch in with the Sunrise group, right? Sunrise Kids, what they're called, Sunrise Kids. That's like the national thing. Let's say you're a volunteer with the Sunrise Kids, and maybe you got something. See, that's the other thing too, right? Because parents want to bond with their kids, and if your kid has decided they're going to be a climate warrior, maybe that's how you bond with your kid. Or maybe you're just a latent dyed-in-the-wool communist, and you get to live the dream through your child. But again, I talked about this on Friday, and the inception of a lot of this goes back to the Fabian socialists. Like the whole climate thing goes back to the Fabian socialists and it begins to move forward. It moves forward into sort of the roots of the 1960s. And then you have sort of this whole West Coast kind of ideology, consciousness, Stanford Research Institute, and you have which we call Esalen, and there's this whole Asilomar, Palo Alto. There's this whole kind of nexus of people and minds, and a lot of them have ties to the military-industrial complex, right? Or intelligence agencies. Tim Leary, who was a really big player back then, of course, worked for the CIA. Stuart Brand, one of the merry pranksters, and goes on to fund the Whole Earth catalog. Stuart Brand was a member of the Army and intelligence. I mean, so all these guys have their fingers in these other worlds. And that ultimately there's this sort of resourcing of the mind share. And then the mind share is, well, how do we create a new model for the world? And what are the organizing principles for bringing people into this new model? How do we get people to theoretically live with less? How do we get people to wrap their heads around the ecosystem? How do we get people to equate consciousness with the earth and earth consciousness and all these things? And I think that they spent a lot of money and a lot of time creating books, speakers, and models to continue to reinforce this paradigm. Again, I talked about this on Friday. And one of the guys that was kind of a big part of this is Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell, if there's no Joseph Campbell, there's no Star Wars. There's no Star Wars without Joseph Campbell. You would get the Hidden Fortress, which is the Kurosawa film that Star Wars is loosely based on, but you wouldn't get Campbell's The Hero's Journey and a lot of the symbols, mythology, and archetypes that George Lucas picks up on. There wouldn't be any Star Wars. And Star Wars has been almost a mythology and a religion unto itself. So Campbell's a huge player in all of this. And then Campbell also, of course, was, he had a huge run on PBS with Bill Moyers. And Bill Moyers, if I'm not mistaken, was Counsel on Foreign Relations. I do believe that there was a concerted effort to promote Joseph Campbell and his ideas. And you may say, well, that's not necessarily bad. Look, I think Campbell did really good work. The Mass of God and the Hero's Journey, those are really interesting works. But are they the underpinnings of a new paradigm? And are they like when he says, follow your bliss? How many people remember? That was like the big buzz phrase of the 80s, follow your bliss. Follow your bliss. There's something to be said for understanding what one has an interest in and can theoretically, reasonably manifest a dream or a goal based on that. But following one's bliss, I think, led people, just like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, right off the edge, right into the river, because I think it was misinterpreted in a lot of ways. But that was again, that was a buzzword, and those kinds of things condition us. They condition us. You know, then you have sort of the modern version of Joseph Campbell, who is Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson says, don't follow your bliss, make your bed, right? You see how that works? So anyway, this is what it all sort of came out of. And it comes out of that 1960s period, again, when Chiron was in Aries, which is where it is now. And we're starting to see some of those same things again. Let's get back to the chart of the moment so I don't get too far afield here. All right, let's just right up here. Let's go back there. So we kind of look at what's happening for the week ahead. Okay, so again, we're still dealing with the Jupiter-Neptune square. And, you know, and I talked about this on Friday on James's show. I've been talking about this for what, the last 3 or 4 months now, 5 months. I think, you know, 6 months easy. You know, this past half year, Jupiter has been squaring Neptune, and it's really, really hard to get to the bottom of the foggy bottom, because that's what Neptune does. When it squares a planet, it creates confusion, diffusion, illusion, maybe in some cases collusion, but this is what happens with the Neptune square. And Jupiter, of course, wants to make things bigger. So here we go again. We're into the Ukraine thing. You know, and who's the whistleblower? Well, one side says Adam Schiff's the whistleblower, and then Stephen Miller comes out and says Trump is the whistleblower, and then we've got Steve Pieczenik, who I think is blind, by the way. I think I figured out why Steve Pieczenik does not turn his computer on and off. I think his eyesight is shot. I don't know how he's staying up on current affairs. Maybe he's just talking more. But I think Steve does not turn his computer on and off because he can't see the switch. That's what I think. We can't figure out how to turn like he probably knows what the on and off switch is. If you ever watch his videos, his wife comes in and starts and stops the video. I think that's why. I think Steve Pieczenik is losing his sight. Anyway, Steve Pieczenik says there's somebody in the CIA. There are no whistleblowers in the CIA. Just fire them all. So now we've got, let's see, Stephen Miller says Trump's the whistleblower. Now they say Schiff's the whistleblower. Now somebody in the CIA is a whistleblower. There's somebody in the Ukraine who's the whistleblower. So how many whistleblowers do we have? And what does the Pied Piper of Hamelin do? He's a fucking whistleblower, right? That's what he does. He's literally blowing a whistle and marching rats right into the Weser River and children into the homes and principalities of neighboring lands and kingdoms, right? So this is a very interesting time. So this is the Neptune Jupiter square. It's like, wow, you know, how do we deal with this, right? How do we deal with this? How do we deal with this kind of, you know, this truth setting in the mainstream media? I'm not sure if we can right now. I think it's very difficult. But I think to depend upon the mainstream media, and even if we get into the alternative media, sometimes, you know, that can be very confusing and oblique as well. And I know that there are people that are really into QAnon and the QAnon realm of research. And sometimes I read some of the QAnon stuff and it just doesn't make any fucking sense to me. And other times the QAnon stuff, well, that's kind of interesting. You know, but I'm not here to, you know, to just get the popcorn, because first of all, I don't eat popcorn. I don't think anybody should eat popcorn. It's genetically modified. So shame on all you QAnon people, not you, the people, but shame on you QAnon telling people to eat popcorn. And then you've got Joe Biden talking about corn pop. Isn't that odd? This is the world we're living in. QAnon says, oh, get the popcorn. And then Joe Biden's talking about how he stood up to corn pop. What a weird world we're living in. Welcome to the Jupiter-Neptune square, right? So, you know, whoever QAnon is, or the people that are interpreting QAnon, Serial Brain, maybe you should like specify, get your genetically modified, get your GMO-free popcorn. Although I'm not even sure, I wouldn't eat popcorn anyway. It's got lectins in it. Maybe there's something else. How about get your pork rinds. Get your pork rinds. Sit back and get your pork rinds. I guess there's some people that wouldn't like the pork rind either. You know what I used to eat? You can still get them now. You get these little dried and salted shrimp. Remember the first time my father bought a pack of them. Yeah, he used to sit around and have a couple beers and eat these dried and salted shrimp. Maybe that's what QAnon could recommend. Sit back, get your dried and salted shrimp. Just make sure they're not from the Gulf. So that's the Jupiter-Neptune square. The other thing I was thinking about, we got these Pluto and Sag Kids, and Jupiter is crossing their Plutos. That's what's happening. They are getting rather emboldened by the expansion process. It's kind of like their Pluto's getting unpacked. You know, it's like when you get a file a compressed file. Somebody sends you a compressed file, and then you have to open it, and then inside that zip file, it's like a zip file, right? So right now, Jupiter is unlocking the zip file of Pluto in the Pluto and Sag Kids charts. So right now we're at the, let's see, the second decan of Jupiter in Sagittarius. And that would be unlocking kind of that, I guess what, 18 to 19-year-old, 17, 18, 19-year-old Pluto and Sag aspect, right? But they're all going to get it. They're all going to have their Pluto unpacked during this time. But what's interesting is their Pluto is getting unpacked, and their generational sort of encoding is beginning to become more accessible, even though they may not even think of it in that way. You've got the Neptune square coming in. So as literally as they're kind of coming of age with Jupiter hitting their Pluto, here's Neptune, the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Follow me, follow me. No, there are other kids, Pluto and Sag kids, like Soph, you know, which is interesting because Sagittarius is philosophical, right? So there are kids like her, and there are more kids like her than the mainstream media will let on. You know, somebody brought up a really interesting point. Remember the kid? Oh God, I can't even think of his name now. It'll come to me. The kid that was in Washington, D.C. And he was just ripped apart by the media. Totally ripped apart because supposedly he had this smug little face on when the Native American group came in and started to harass him. They bullied him. The mainstream media bullied that kid, bullied him. And they said, this is everything that's wrong with America and white America and young white boys. And nobody ever really retracted that because he didn't do the things that the mainstream media ascribed that he did. He didn't do it. Did we get any apologies? Were we talking about kid gloves there? You know, were we asking why he triggered people so badly? Did anybody write op-eds about why he triggered the left and what we had to learn about that? No, we didn't. Nobody penned those op-eds. But now with Greta, we're supposed to kind of fall in the line, and she's untouchable. She's part of a caste. She's the untouchable caste. And ultimately, that's not really true, but that's how the media wants to portray her. It's a very interesting kind of double standard, right? But there are other kids in that generation who are not skipping school, who are not running out to protest climate change in the way that the banks and the NGOs all want to invest in, because these are their consumers for tomorrow. These are the people that ultimately, within 3 to 4 years, will be casting their votes at the ballot box. They know that, and they're grooming these kids. They're grooming them so that when they hit 18, and they're not that far away, during the next election, they'll have been radicalized so that they can vote towards whatever agenda that these people want to roll out. And I'm hoping that these children will be, how do I say it? I'm hoping that these children will be wise enough and wake up fast enough to understand that they are being used as part of a political machination, that they're being used as pawns in a greater game and a greater scheme to enact a paradigm change. And woe unto those who are behind this, because when these kids do wake up, these are Pluto and Sag kids. You're not going to get them back. You will not get them back. So if you're going to make your move with these kids and you're going to mobilize them, you better make sure that you get them in a straight, you get one shot, because after that, you won't get them back. And woe unto you Because once they figure out that they've been manipulated, once they figure out they've been lied to, you know, hopefully if they're not so estrogenized or whatever they've got, you know, sort of in the hopper for these kids, that they'll stand up and say, we're not going to do anything like this ever again, and go fuck yourselves, right? So for those of you who are actually running the program, you better get it right, because you don't get a second chance with these kids. And this is what's happening though. So Neptune, when you look at Neptune, it's also in square with their Plutos, you know? Think about that. They got Pluto and Sag, and they're dealing with a Neptune square. It's very timely. Hold on, people keep wanting to talk to me. Okay. Okay. Do you guys get that? Do you see what's happening? I mean, this is I'm looking at this from a generational perspective, because they're coming of age and they're waking up, and they're waking up in their minds. But with the Neptune square, Jupiter is unpacking their Pluto. Neptune is obfuscating their generational message. Okay, that's what's going on. A lot of intensity tonight out there in the world. Can you feel it? Does that make sense to you guys? Saturn's moving forward now, thank God. We've got a Saturn movement. Pluto's still retrograde, but it's moving into a closer sextile with Neptune. If you have a dream, you can put it into action, but it's through hard work. It is not through wishful or magical thinking. That would be the Jupiter square. It is through the application of discipline, structure, order, and form. And these things can manifest. Okay. We have Mars at 27 Virgo, final degrees. It's a lot of intense energy, those final degrees. So get your work done now, because when it moves into Libra, we'll all be too busy debating one another's point of view to get anything realistically done at that point. Let's see what else. Venus is moving into a Pluto square tomorrow. This is something you want to pay attention to, because it's a very intense aspect, and getting into sort of how do I say this? There can be a great deal of intensity around winning. You know, it's like because Libra is about negotiation, and Venus is about negotiation and contracts and relationships. And when you get a Venus Pluto square, somebody generally in that transaction, somebody wants to come out on top with a Venus Pluto square. There can be endings around relationships over the course of the next couple of days, or relationships that have to become reborn in some ways, renewed with a Venus Pluto square. So think about that as well. That's just in the next, we should be looking at that for the next, I'd say 72 hours, the next 3 days. And in your own life, you should be looking at perhaps changes in certain or specific relationships that you have. It's going to be a very interesting week, no doubt. But we have with the new moon, which kind of coursed through the conjunction with the sun, and that was what, 2 days ago. So we're still in that new moon energy, but later in the week it moves into, let's see, a Monday, late Monday night, that moon moves into Scorpio. It's a very different kind of energy now, isn't it? So try to get your balancing and your negotiations and all the stuff. Even Pluto, even Mercury is in square with Pluto. So is Mercury. This is an interesting time. Don't settle for things. If you have to go through something difficult, if you have to cut something off, if you have to go through a challenging transaction, You just have to go through it. And that's just the way it is. It's difficult sometimes. So I think we're part of what we're looking at here at the beginning of the week is a process of letting go in some ways. That's how I would interpret it. But it's not letting go in the Neptunian sense. With Pluto, it's kind of intense. And it doesn't mean, sometimes you have to fight with Pluto too. Sometimes you have to kind of fight for what is right, what is just, and what is true. And that's what's happening, at least as I see it with these squares. Okay, why don't I have a little bit of a break here, and we're going to get into just a couple more charts, and we'll call it an evening, because apparently somebody really needs to get a hold of me. And let me just check in with you guys and see where you're at. So I can find my way back to you. You find the silver cord back to your life. Silver cord back to the chat room. And we got 120 people watching. Fear is a program. Our thoughts create. What do you want to create? What do we have? Is that you, Renee? What else? A computer simulation, uncanny valley effect is very much in evidence. Heard Greta getting acting lessons from Emma Thompson, who coincidentally played Nanny McPhee. That wasn't that interesting. Yeah, did she also? Who played? Who did the remake of? Mary Poppins. Who was Mary Poppins in the remake? Who was Mary Poppins? Who else we got here? Let's see. I fear there is no waking up for them. The entire generation, perpetual therapy in wake of all this. Well, it's going to be interesting because when Pluto goes into Aquarius, they're going to have that Pluto trine. And man, that's just like, that's big stuff, right? Because we're talking outer planets, both of them. And then the Pluto in Aquarius is going to, when Pluto's in Aquarius, it's going to square the millennials Pluto. That's going to be kind of a heavy time for the millennials, I think. I think the millennials at that point are either going to burn the whole fucking thing down or they're going to realize how much responsibility they have. That's my 2 cents around that. Okay, why don't I quickly get into a couple other charts here. I wanted to get into the Greta chart as it related to the speech at the UN. Okay, let me find that Greta chart. Okay, so this is the speech. This is the chart for the speech. So let me just throw this up here. Okay. All right, here's the chart for the speech. And so I believe it was 10 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. Bright and early, 10 a.m. And when we look at this is a very interesting chart because look at the 11th house. The 11th house has Mars, Sun in Libra, Mars in Virgo. And by the way, Mars in Libra, which is coming up, is a like hardcore activist energy. Mars in Libra is a SJW aspect. And Ocasio-Cortez, she has Mars in Libra. Yeah, that's true. So if you look at the 11th house, so we're going to hear more from her this week. I guarantee you, she's going to have her Mars return. She'll be on fire. Anyway, I'd say keep your eyes open for her, but you probably won't be able to not miss her. So we have these this stellium. Now they're different. Obviously, Mars is in a different sign, right? But we do have a stellium in Libra and Mars right there. So 4 planets in the 11th house. And what is the 11th house? It's like the United Nations. It's groups, organizations, right? It's a group. It's a big group. It's a planetary group. And, you know, theoretically, the United Nations is going to rule the world, be the governing body of the world. So they're loaded for bear here with this speech at this time. And then Scorpio is on the ascendant, which is representative transformation, especially in the first decan. And then we have Pallas That's not, yeah, it's Pallas, right? Yeah, it's Pallas. Had a little Vesta moment there. We have Pallas on the ascendant. And Pallas is very interesting because it has to do, you know, all the asteroids are, they're feminine, and they represent sort of different versions of the feminine. And Pallas is not quite, she's not quite old. I believe Vesta is old. Vesta is like the eternal flame, right? It's the eternal flame that burns forever. And Pallas is like the consort of, say, it's like Hera, the consort of Zeus. And then you have Ceres, who is the earth grain, or the grain goddess, or the mother, the nurturing mother. And then you have Juno, who is the marrying maiden. By the way, apparently Juno is a pretty big significator when it comes to your relationship and marriage. So you want to look at where your Juno is in your chart, because only Juno and I know. Anyway, that would give you some indication of the kind of bond or marriage bond that would be good for you. How about that? I got mine in Sagittarius. So I like a little adventure and freedom. You know. Anyway, that's been a difficult one to kind of reconcile, but that's another story. So we have right here, this would be sort of like in that, Pallas is in like that third phase. It's not quite the crone, which is, I believe, Vesta, and it's not the nurturing mother, which is Ceres. It's not the marrying maiden, which is Juno. Pallas is like Hera, and it's a very powerful. It is, you know, Pallas is, Hera is like the counterpart of Zeus, right? I mean, you know, she's the feminine aspect of Zeus. So we have a very strong feminine principle on the ascendant. It's almost dominating. And what kind of message were we given by young Miss Greta? It was one of intensity, life and death, as it were. Very scorpionic, isn't it? Very, very scorpionic. And then we have the assemblage of all these planets in the halls of the UN, which is the 11th house. And look what's on the midheaven. It's Leo. And what does Leo represent? Represent children. The power of the child with the part of fortune just a few degrees off of fixed star Regulus, the royal star. So this was a perfect day for this speech to have been given. And 10 o'clock is a very good time. Now, there was a lot going on at the UN during that time, but 10 o'clock was the time that this thing started, right? So whether Greta actually gave her speech specifically at 10 o'clock, that's not necessarily what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the opening bell. It went on from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. So this is when the event started. This is when the die was cast for that event, okay? Somewhere in there was when Greta gave her speech. But this is what's happening. And then look at the third house now. Look at the third house. We have Saturn, the South Node, and Pluto, all in the sign of Capricorn. Jupiter is in the second house. It's in the second house, so it's expanding this idea of Taurus, which is the earth and resources and assets. Correct? That's what the second house is. And Jupiter comes in, expands it. And what is Jupiter? It's ideological. So now we have the ideological expansion of the second house. We also happen to have an inconjunct with the moon. So the moon is the lunar force. Of course, we're dealing with a young woman, correct? We're dealing with young Greta, but we're also probably dealing with something beyond Greta, somebody beyond, whether it's Greta's mother or whether it's Greta's handler, right? Or whether we're dealing with the moon as a force in general, because the moon is what? The moon tends towards things like mania, lunacy, all the things that we attribute to the moon. And some people will say, well, the moon is just a metal object. It was just put there by some other force, and it's not really. The moon has an impact on the tides. It has an impact on our blood. has an impact on our thoughts. So the moon does matter. And when it's in its own sign, I think it perhaps matters even more. So we're dealing with lunacy. We're dealing with lunacy. And we've got the square to Mercury going on right there. You see that? Mercury moon square. That's the battle between rationality and the mind, which is Mercury, and the moon, which is the emotions. They're in conflict here. They're in conflict because people got carried away. Look at what the moon is doing. It's in trine with Neptune. Holy smokes. Of course there's going to be Greta mania. Of course, you're dealing with the moon-Neptune trine. Yeah, these people, they set this up in a really interesting way. You've got Leo on the midheaven, the child, the part of fortune at 26 degrees, conjunct fixed star Regulus, the intensity of Scorpio with Pallas on the ascendant, and then you have Jupiter in the second house. And look what Ceres is doing there. It's conjunct Jupiter. I mean, what does Ceres look like? Ceres looks like the staff of a shepherd, doesn't it? Doesn't Ceres just kind of resemble like, okay, we're gonna just go lead the sheep to slaughter? I mean, that's what Ceres actually really, to me, how it manifests here. Again, there's this shepherd kind of motif. It's also very interesting when you look at the myth or the story of the Children's Crusades. One of the Children's Crusaders, one of the most important of the Children's Crusaders, was greeted by a shepherd. Well, he was a shepherd. He was a not very bright boy. And he was greeted by a mystical man in a robe who gave him a vision about the Crusades. It's a very, very interesting story. Anyway, so we have Ceres here. Very interesting stuff. Ceres, conjunct Jupiter, second house, square Neptune. The blurring and the obfuscation. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to throw Greta's chart up here so that you guys can see what I'm talking about and how it all sort of, how it all fits together. Okay, let me see if I can find it here. I think this is it. God, I'm on tonight. Okay. So this is the same chart that we had, correct? This was 10 a.m. when the event at the UN takes place. Starts at 10 a.m. And that's what I'm basing this chart on. Now we look at Greta's chart, and what do we see here? Well, her Mars, she's got that Mars-Venus conjunction. You know, the thing with Mars-Venus is sometimes it can be very kind of asexual or unisexual, sometimes even bisexual. And there are times where Greta looks very much like a boy. And there are times where Greta looks like a girl. Now, some people say that Greta might even be a boy. Well, I'm not going to go that far. But I will say that she's got that kind of unisex combination of Venus and Mars in her chart, and in Scorpio, and in the first house, where it all kicks off. So Mars is very forceful. And look at her Mars. Her Mars was in trine with the moon. Her Mars was in trine with Neptune. That's actually a lot of juice. Mars, Neptune trine. And her Mars is at 21 Scorpio. Neptune's at what, 18? Right? It's at Neptune's at 16 Pisces. So Neptune and her Mars are going to be in trine for a couple of years. Yeah, exactly. But here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You see where Jupiter is right here? This is her Pluto. So this is generational Pluto. And so she's got it at 18 degrees, and Jupiter is at 17 degrees. So there is something to be said for astrology here, and not just the fact that Greta Thunberg is somebody who's been moved to the front of the pack and basically playing her role as a little Pied Piper of Hamelin in some ways. But that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the unpacking of the Pluto. That's the zip file that gets unpacked. It's happening with her, and it's happening across an entire generation. And then we have the square to Neptune and it's obfuscated. Now, remember, I said that at some point, transiting Pluto, which is here, right, will eventually move into Aquarius, and that'll happen in the end of 2024, beginning of 2025, and that's going to start to trine their Plutos. And that's going to be a very interesting time for Generation Z. And they're either going to push back and put the brakes on hard, or they're going to be sort of the first wave of whatever kind of new paradigm, socialist, social credit, social credit Gaia paradigm that they're piecing together so that they can push them forward. It's going to be very interesting. Nothing is written in stone, by the way, especially not with a generation that has Pluto in a mutable sign. They're changeable. They are changeable. So, but this is an interesting because Neptune is squaring their natal Plutos, and will continue. So it's going to take them a while, I think, to sort through, what is real. But it's right there, right there. Now look at down here, the third house, which is communication. And Greta's Sun, Chiron, Moon, she's got a new moon, and Mercury are all in the third house. Set up to communicate. Boom. But not without conflict, because there's the Mercury square and the Venus square. That's happening. That's all happening, right? So there is some conflict here. People aren't always, some people are not digging the message. Why? Because they want to bring balance to this thing. They want to bring balance to what she's saying. It's imbalanced. It's totally imbalanced. She's a fear peddler, and she's peddling fear for the kids. Apparently, there's some kid, I can't quote you on this, or give you a link, but I'll give you apparently some kid committed suicide because they were so freaked out. Think about that. Think about the power here. Oh, they're not going to do anything with the world. We got 8 years left. Fuck, I'm scared. I mean, this is so irresponsible. It is so irresponsible. The kid in Washington, his name was Nick, right? Nick something. Is it Nick Sands? Something like that? Nick Sand. Anyway. Sandman? Is that it? Is it Nick Sandman? I'm trying to remember his last name. His name was Nick. Anyway. Yeah, it's just so irresponsible. What if let's flip this around, okay? What if I got on here and said, you're all fucked. You're all fucked. We're all going to die. We're not doing enough. We're not doing enough. We're all going to die, and we got 8 years left. How responsible is that? I mean, it'd just be so irresponsible. Even if I knew somehow, if I had a Moses on the mountain moment, even if I knew, do you think it would be really, really responsible for me to tell you that in that way? No, not at all. I might say, hey man, you might want to get your house together. You might want to get your house straight. You may want to get right with God, because you never know. We got the end times perhaps knocking at the door. I'm just saying, that might be a better way of going about it. It's irresponsible. It's totally irresponsible. Apparently, the authorities in Sweden are going to pay a little visit to her parents. It's not right. It's not right what she's saying. It's not right what she's prophesying. It's not right. And not only is it not right, but she is shilling for a $15 billion, $150 billion industry. That's what she's doing. Not only is it not right, but it's criminal. Sorry. And I'm not here to get, and say, oh, she's an angry little witch. And I'm not going to go there. It's reprehensible. The amount of fear that is being promoted is beyond the pale. Beyond the pale. We got the inconjunct right here. Guess what? There's Greta's. Oh, look at that. Would you look at that? Fucking Jupiter. Her Jupiter and Leo is right on the midheaven at that moment. You can't tell me that the UN doesn't have an astrologer. You can't tell me that. Are you kidding me? My God. Look at that thing. Look at that thing. It's right up there. Jupiter, Jupiter trine, Pluto, Jupiter trine. They're getting their bang for their buck out of this experience. Holy smokes. That's some pretty impressive planning. And I do believe there's planning involved here. Then we have the in conjunct with Neptune. What's that about? Well, it's like, well, there's something wrong with this thing. There's something wrong. You know, there's some rotten cheese in Sweden. Sweden's have cheese. I think I see some Swedish cheese at the market every now and then. It's not very prominent. I think it's called Norsk or something like that. Anyway, there's something wrong here with the Jupiter Neptune in conjunct, and I think that's what that's pointing to. That's mine. And you guys see what's happening? Look at this. Freaking Jupiter's right in the midheaven. At the start of the day, which is like the casting of the chart. Like the speech, I think came a little bit later. This is when all the festivities started. 10 o'clock when they announced everything. And then we have, of course, the gang. The gang's all there in the 11th house. 11th house of Aquarius. And we're headed towards the 11th house, where the days of the 10th house are over. Although our corporate overlords will always retain their 10th house status, will just put on new robes and become priests of a different sect. That's all. Okay, let me drop on out of here. Let me check in with you guys once again and see where you're at. See where you're all at. Let's see. Carol, hi Carol. I'm confident Greta getting pushed is going to fade away. I think so. I would agree with you, although how soon, that remains to be seen. Just more big theater on the world stage. Praise God, the 10th house is over. Although, be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for, because that 11th house can go in a number of different directions. We'll see. We shall see. Let's see. What else do we have here? What if we all send Greta a big 15-minute flame hug for her awakening? Throw off the chains of her bondage and exploitation for manipulative forces hounding her. Why don't we do that? Let's just all send Greta some truth waves. Greta, get the truth waves. Get the truth waves, Greta. May truth interpenetrate your heart and your mind so that you wake up to the fact that you're actually being manipulated. And that somehow, somewhere, somebody who really cares about you and really loves you will stand by you and keep you out of the clutches of these people who want to use you for their own ends. May it happen, and may it happen in God's time and with God's love, Greta. And that you may have your own personal awakening and not the false awakening of which you are prophesying and sharing with the children of the world. Let's send that out to Greta. God bless her and love her. There we go. All right, I guess I want to look at Trump's chart really quickly. So I want to get out of here. I got to make a phone call. Somebody needs me to talk with them. So let me just see if I can dial up Trump's chart, because he's got a lot of shit going on. And it's actually in the title of the show tonight. So I have to do that. But I do have his chart on hand, in which case it's quite easy for me. How about that Jupiter on the midheaven, man? That was something. That was something. All right, Donald Trump, there he is. Dun, 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 dun. By the way, Greta is in Trump's 5th house of children. He's got his 5th house is I wonder if I should do a Trump and Greta chart. I could do that right now. I could do a Trump and Greta synastry. Let's do that right now. Let's see what their charts look like together. Ooh, a lot of, oh man. I just got to throw this up here so you guys can see this. This is pretty rad. Pretty rad. Okay. Let's see. This is it right here. There it is. There's the Trump and Greta chart. Trump is on the inside. Greta's on the outside. You see what I mean? She's got her Chiron, Sun, Moon, all down here in the 5th house. Children is, so the South Node is here as well, right? And there is just a lot of opposition going on there. There's a lot of opposition. Pluto's on his moon, by the way. A lot of opposition. Her Jupiter is in his 12th house. Interesting. Oh, look at this. Saturn-Sun conjunction. Wow. Isn't that interesting? Her Saturn is right on his Sun. It's kind of a moment of destiny in a lot of ways. They're linked together. Very interesting. And she's got a Saturn-Pluto opposition. Interesting stuff. Her true node is in Sag, not far away from his. You know, apparently she wanted a hug or something from him. And then she was very disappointed that he just blew her off. And then she started to stare at him and throw darts at him with her eyes. Mars-Uranus opposition. These, I got to say, man, there's some rivalry here. There's a little bit of rivalry. That Saturn-Sun conjunction is very interesting. This is kind of karmic, right? It's kind of karmic. And in a weird way, like, you know, who's going to show who the lesson? Is Greta going to show Trump the lesson? Or will Trump show Greta how to be more responsible with their Saturn? It can be very interesting. And also the relationship with men, because certain men apparently are triggered by Greta. Is that because of the Saturn-Sun conjunction and Trump is sort of the man of the United States House, so to speak? Is that what this is about? It's very, very interesting. A lot of opposition here. There's some potential to kind of work together. Got some nice trines here. Some nice trines. But man, oh man, there's a lot of conflict in those two charts. All right, let me get back to just the Donald himself. Let's just see what's going on with him. Okay, let's stop share. Just real quick, let me reset the chart. And let's get into Trump's chart. Let's throw some transits up there. Just get a quick look at what's happening for him. Let's throw some fixed stars in there, and let's see what we got. Okay. So let's see. All right, so that's there's Trump's chart. Is there anything of note here? Well, again, we got that Saturn-Pluto transit going through his 5th house. South Node is there. But I really feel like, I don't know, once the election cycle kicks in, if he can get through this impeachment thing, then this true node is going to be right up here throughout the entire election cycle and be in his 10th house. To me, it represents re-election, to be honest with you, or to be frank with you, because I've been honest all night. Yeah, you know, I'm not seeing the noise around the Ukraine stuff. I'm just not seeing it. I mean, I guess if we maybe looked at the sidereal version of his chart, maybe that might pop a little bit, but I'm just not seeing. Uranus is in the 9th house, transiting the 9th house, foreign countries. What's it doing? It's actually in sextile with his Mercury. You know, that's actually pretty good for him, which means that he could have some very interesting changes to his intellect, how he thinks, how he processes information. I don't really see that as being anything out of the ordinary or difficult. No, I'm just not seeing it. Maybe Chiron opposing Neptune, perhaps, in the 8th house, something hidden. But I'm not feeling it. Just not feeling it. Maybe Jupiter, perhaps, the conjunction with the moon opposing the sun. Jupiter in Sag on his south node. Maybe that's it. You just have to deal with some of this more bullshit with stuff that has to do with foreign countries. But I think he's going to survive this thing. I don't see anything right now tearing him apart, unless there's something in the progress chart that I haven't looked at yet. But I think he's going to get through this. And they better, if they're going to knock him out, then they're going to have to knock him out. They're going to have to knock Pence out. They're going to have to knock Bill Barr out. They're going to have to knock them all out. There's going to have to be a coup. They're just going to have to do it. This is where they're at now. Because if they don't do it, he's going to win. When that true node goes up into the 10th house, that's the fulfillment in a lot of ways of his destiny. His destiny was not, the fulfillment of his destiny was not getting elected the first time. The fulfillment of his destiny will be to be elected the second time. And that'll be a very interesting period. Because if he gets elected again, they're out of bullets. So there's a lot on the table right now. That means keep your head on the swivel. Okay. I got one more chart for tonight. And it is very interesting. Very interesting chart. There was a guy by the name of Marc Bolan, who was a glam rocker. And he was one of these guys that sort of kind of initiated, like, there was always this sort of androgynous quality to rock and roll, right? There was always the sort of the quality of the androgyne in rock and roll. You go back and you look at somebody like Little Richard. I mean, what was Little Richard, man? I mean, Little Richard was like a freaking tranny. You really look at Little Richard and watch me, you're just like, what is going on with this guy? And then, of course, you have the kind of the long hair of the Beatles and the British invasion and all that stuff. Which again, it's begins to kind of invoke sort of the long hair phase of the 1960s and everything that kind of went along with that. What's really interesting about the 60s, you look at the long hair of the 60s, it wasn't necessarily what I would call androgynous in some ways. Like you go back to like the 1800s. In a lot of cases, men wore their hair very long during the 1800s. Mostly, like if you look at like Kit Carson and Wild Bill Hickok, they've got shoulder length hair. So it wasn't like this was the first time that men grew their hair long, but there was a very different quality and a very different vibe to what was going on with, say, Marc Bolan and David Bowie and some of the other sort of glam rockers during that time. Let me throw up Marc Bolan's picture so you guys can get a visual of him. This is kind of an interesting visual. So here's Marc Bolan. He was born Mark Feld, F-E-L-D, and he sort of came in on the wings of the 1960s and psychedelia, and started a band called Tyrannosaurus. Well, first of all, I think it was with the Children. It was the Children of John. I think that was the first band that he was in, and then he spun off and did a band with this guy named Mickey Finn, who played percussion, and they were called Tyrannosaurus Rex. And their music was very mystical. There were a lot of these festivals and fairs that were happening in England during that time, and like Marc Bolan and Bowie, and they were very kind of airy-fairy, very fey. There was a very fey quality. Again, it kind of gets into sort of this kind of mystical vibe, like around 68, 69, 70s when Neptune goes into Sagittarius. And so this kind of fey mystical quality is a really big scene in England. And, and Marc Bolan and transcendentalism was very kind of big. Of course, the Beatles had sort of paved the way with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So no, Nick Sandman was, what was he? I'm sorry. I'm still with this guy's Nick's name. Anyway, this is popping in my head. Anyway, they enter Sandman. So Bolan is part of this wave. And again, Tyrannosaurus Rex, wish I could play some of their music because some of it's actually pretty cool. There's a song called Deborah that they do, which is beautiful. But again, the sound is mystical. It's kind of psychedelic, very Fey-like. And let me get to Marc Bolan's chart. Pull that up. Jasper, you are incorrigible. Let me go back over here. Where is he? Let me find him. Mark. Paging Marc Bolan. Marc Bolan. Paging Marc Bolan. The people will never see you show where it's like, what the fuck is that guy doing with that cat? I mean, really, I normally wouldn't do a show with a cat. I really would normally not do a show with a cat. But what can I say? You know, what are you going to do? Kick him off? He'll just come back. He's a freaking cat. Okay, so let me get into Marc Bolan's chart real quick. All right, here's his chart. So he is a Libra, and his sun is right on the midheaven at 29 Virgo, anaretic Virgo. And it's interesting. I've always dug T-Rex's music. So my sun would be right up there. Anyway, so here's his sun, and he had a Neptune Sun conjunction in his chart. So this is a really interesting conjunction because there's a 5-degree separation there, which means that he knew who he was, but he was always evolving and kind of always changing and had this sort of mutability. And Marc Bolan, he was a total heartthrob. You know, he was very small. I think he was about maybe 5'4", 5'5" in platform shoes, maybe. But this kind of wizardly, mystical sort of vibe that he had was evident. It's evident in his chart. And he's got the Mercury conjunction. Well, it's not quite wide, but he's got a Venus conjunction with Neptune. So Marc Bolan was kind of an enchanter. But there was also another side to Bolan, and he was sort of strangely prophetic in a lot of ways. And I'm going to play a video about these odd details that surround his death. Now, he does have this Sagittarius rising, and at one point I read this interview where he's talking about he was talking about creating sort of his own universe and his own mythology. He said he was having discussions with Stan Lee. It's a very unusual interview because Stan Lee was around back then, and Marc Bolan did an album called Electric Warrior. And he was trying to pitch Stan Lee on the idea of a comic book with the Electric Warriors being kind of this in the Marvel universe. And apparently Stan Lee hated Conan. That's what Marc Bolan said in the interview. True node in Taurus. Look what we have here. Conjunction fixed-stole algol. Decapitation. Now, Marc Bolan, I don't believe, got decapitated, but he was in a car accident, and I'll show you a picture of the car. Holy smokes. I'm surprised he got out of it. You know, it's interesting. Marc Bolan, again, this is kind of the odd thing. Like, he had a fear of dying prematurely in a car accident, so he never taught himself how to drive. Isn't that odd? He had a fear about dying prematurely in the car accident. And he didn't teach himself how to drive. So when he died, he wasn't driving. It was the woman who was the soon to be the mother of his child, Gloria Jones, who's an American. And I think Gloria Jones might have been like the girlfriend of David Bowie for a little while. And then she, you know, hopped over to Marc Bolan. And Marc Bolan had a huge amount of success for about 4 or 5 years. And then he sort of lost the plot. And this is 1977 when he dies. And at that time, he actually went on tour with The Damned, you know, punk rock band. So Marc Bolan was embracing punk rock. And he came up with this new, odd new band called Zinc Alloy and the Hidden Riders of Tomorrow. Does that not sound like a comic book to you? He's a very fictional character, this guy, and very wizardly in his own way. And I know you guys know his music. He wrote a song about Jeepster, right? Girl, I'm about to be Jeepster for your love. So, right, he writes songs about cars, and he doesn't even drive. And he has a fear of being killed in a car accident prematurely because he, that's what his fear was. So he didn't learn how to drive. Very unusual. But he compared himself in some way. He said, William Blake would be very proud of me. That he has the Sagittarius ascendant. Of course, that's the calling card of William Blake. And let's just say Marc Bolan loved the good life. Like Marc Bolan, really liked being a rock star. Really, really liked being a rock star. He liked the sex, probably, switch hitting, which was not uncommon. He liked the drugs and he liked the drink, and he wasn't very tall, so he put on a lot of weight. And eventually, Gloria Jones meets him. He gets her pregnant. She cleans him up, and they're ready to take this next kind of spin. I actually saw Don Kirshner's rock concert. This band, it was supposedly, it was just Marc Bolan, but they had this weird name. But he's got this grand trine. Look at the grand trine. He's got Jupiter and Scorpio in the 12th house. And again, when I play this video, you're going to see that this guy was oddly prophetic in a lot of the things that he sung about that were associated and related to his death. Very strange. And then he has the grand trine with the moon in Pisces, very mystical, Mars in Cancer. So there was Marc Bolan mania in England. He was as big or bigger than the Beatles, because by the time Marc Bolan hits the scene, of course, the Beatles are split up and they're doing their separate things, and the music scene has moved on. Marc Bolan, for about 3 or 4 years in England, was as big as it got, and he just couldn't. He just really couldn't hold it together. Anyway, I want to do his. I'm going to show you what was going on at the time of his death. Look at the planets, because it's pretty interesting. So let me get back into this. You'll see what's going on here. I know you will. You guys are smart. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So this is what was going on. Now, he died on September 16th. It was 1977, 5 p.m. They had been at a pub in Berkeley Square. They'd been drinking. He was not driving. Gloria Jones was driving. And look at where Pluto is in his chart. He was going through a Pluto-Venus conjunction and a Pluto-Neptune conjunction. So Marc Bolan's Neptune was at, let's see, Neptune was in Sag then. So Marc Bolan's Neptune was at 10 Libra, and Pluto was at 13 Libra, right? So it was just going over his Pluto. And what do we have here? We have Mars in his chart. Actually, it's trans-Mars. Transiting Mars is at 9. So we have a Pluto-Mars square as well going on at that time. And you could see where Pluto had basically tracked, if you go back, and his sun is at, 5 Libra. If you go, this is in 1977. And you go back to, say, 1971, 72, Pluto is right on his sun in the 10th house. And of course, he's going to be really prominent. He's going to be a big deal. He never made it in the United States. But what's ironic is after his death, you can't hear a freaking commercial without hearing one of his songs. And it's usually Jeepster, right? So when Pluto was on his sun, he didn't die. He actually kind of reached this, almost Phoenix-like peak in his chart. But with the conjunction with Venus and the conjunction, now the relationship with Gloria Jones transformed him. But it's so interesting that he has this Pluto conjunction with Neptune at that time. And then we have the Mars square going on with Pluto, transiting Mars, and transiting Jupiter also in a wide square. And then we have, let's see what else. At that time, the moon is right at the final degrees. Where is it? Pisces, 26 Pisces. So let's see, it was opposition. We have an opposition, right? It's actually, let's see, at that time, well, it wasn't full, but the sun was in opposition to his moon. And he was just, well, he was born sort of more towards the full moon, almost a full moon. Then with the inconjunct here with Moon and Saturn. But to me, really the interesting thing is Pluto conjunct Neptune. And he'd gone through a phase where his career kind of tailed off and died, because when Pluto was on the sun, like I said, he was a big deal. And then it just dropped. And there was a whole new wave of, literally new wave of artists that just completely displaced Marc Bolan. Like the punk thing starts to happen around 75, 76. And Bolan's got a really strong, about 4 to 5 year run. But I just thought that this Neptune, Pluto and Neptune was like, wow, interesting, transform or die. And he was really trying to transform, but he ultimately wound up dying. So let me play you this really interesting video. It's very quick, and it's about some of the strange anomalies with Marc Bolan's death. Let me just play this for you guys. And you'll see what I'm talking about. It's very unusual stuff. So let me do the screen share one more time. And it's not a very long video, but it's definitely, you'll definitely get a sense of this kind of prophetic Sun-Neptune conjunction with Jupiter in the 12th house. The sense of like almost being in tune with his own predestination. Like he realized that he wouldn't look past 30. You'll see this. Here we go. This is very interesting. Get in the share on this.
The official fan club is an organisation that tends to concentrate on reissues and remixes and all this kind of thing, where the Marc Bolan Liberation Front are busily trying to go for a course in getting Marc Bolan's name in the history of rock.
He wasn't just this glam rock star that existed from 72 to 73.
He went around on a Vespa motorbike when he was only 13. He went on tour with The Damned. He was a real dude.
But the Bolan legend lives on in other, spookier ways. Marc left behind a series of spine-chilling coincidences that have been baffling his fans ever since.
He did say that he would never live till 30, and he was right.
Marc died 2 weeks before his 30th birthday.
The lyrics to Solid Gold Easy Action, which came out in December 1972, and the opening line is, life is the same and it always will be, easy as picking foxes from a tree.
The registration of the Mini picked off the tree was...
Okay, life is the same as it always will be, like picking foxes off a tree. Remember that. Okay, look at his license plate. It's FOX, Fox, and then 66, 66, and it slams into a tree, like picking foxes from a tree. I'm going to play that for you again. This is what she has to say. One more time.
Never lived till 30, and he was right.
Marc died 2 weeks before his 30th birthday.
The lyrics to Solid Gold Easy Action, which came out in December 1972, and the opening line is, life is the same and it always will be, easy as picking foxes from a tree.
The registration of the Mini picked off the tree was FOX.
He wrote a song called Celebrate Summer, which he said in the lyric, summer is heaven in 77.
Marc went to heaven in 1977.
Marc's very first demo, when he was called Toby Tyler, was a song called The Road I'm On, Gloria. And the lyric goes, the road I'm on won't carry me home.
Marc hadn't then met the Gloria that wouldn't carry him safely home.
The other cosmic tree coincidence, there's a painting by Magritte called 16th of September.
Marc was killed on the 16th of September by a tree not dissimilar.
About Gloria and the road that won't take me home. He didn't know this woman, Gloria Jones, at the time. And she was driving the car. Very odd stuff. And that thing about the tree, right? That tree is called the 16th of September by Magritte. He dies on the 16th of September. It hits a freaking tree. And apparently the poor tree just got the shit beat out of it by all these Marc Bolan fans. There's something very unusual about all of this. And is it astrological with the Sun Neptune conjunction in his chart? And a lot of what was happening with Pluto on his Sun and Pluto, you know, not quite on his Neptune yet, but, you know, was he experiencing some kind of interesting, almost prophetic relationship with his art? The other thing that comes to mind, and I just have to throw this out there, is that I'm not saying that this is the case, but did Marc Bolan do a deal with the devil? I'm just throwing this out there, right? Because if you look at his rise and fame and fall, it happens incredibly quickly, very quickly. And then what do we have here? We have, look at this, FOX 66. That was what we saw. It's the license plate of the car. Apparently there's some other numbers perhaps on the other side, but this is what we see. And Gloria Jones actually lives and then has Mark's child. And he is, she had a broken, I think, collarbone and some other broken bone. And then Marc Bolan is dead before his 30th birthday. Anyway, very unusual stuff. And I think that perhaps part and parcel, it might have to do with the fact that he's somebody that lived with a Neptune Sun conjunction in his chart. And again, if you go back and look at his chart, Neptune was transiting his first house in Sagittarius, and that gets back to that kind of mystical, spiritual kind of time. He really picked up on that. And then you go back to his chart, and his chart is 3 degrees. Let me see if I can just find